You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. Yemi, welcome back. It's been 2 years, 3 years. What did we?
That's it.
I don't know.
It's longer.
Yeah,
But I think you're right. At least 3 years for sure.
Yeah, it's been a while. I mean, we'll talk about it, but you have a new job. You were just sharing how your daughter is now 11. Yeah, time is flying. So,
and you too, Daniel. I mean, you got a 4-month-old baby, and Stephen, you got some great news as well. And so, yeah, like we're grown.
I feel like a proper grown-up these days. I have a child, I have a house, I have a business.
I think it was your comment right before we hit record. You literally said, I don't know, I'm just tired. And that describes parent, like that's it. That's all you have to say is I am tired. And I feel like every parent knows where you're at.
I feel like I shouldn't be because I'm getting sleep. And I know most new parents don't get sleep. So I feel like I shouldn't complain, but I'm still tired. To your point, I don't know.
I think it comes with the age thing. It's once you get to a certain age, no matter what you do, how much sleep you get, you just feel like, oh, some days,
like,
not all days. So.
Yeah, I'm like, is it the allergies? Like, I don't know what it is, but
if I'm just tired, like that's a good outcome. If I wake up and get out of bed and all I'm feeling is tired, like that's the most negative thing. Because half the time, like my big toe hurts, or like I'm like, how did I pull my hip just getting out of bed? Oh man, problems.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Well, maybe still start the show the same way, and that's with good news stories. How about you go first?
I'm happy to. And so last week, my daughter, I talked about her, Bella. She's 11 now, like you mentioned, Daniel. She plays tennis, and so she was part of this tennis camp here in Chicago, and she got selected as one of the kids to go to the U.S. Open and have a 20-minute exhibition match. Now, it sounds a lot more competitive than that, but it's not. It's literally 20 minutes of them rallying back and forth on the big courts. So her mom, myself, and her got to go out there to U.S. Open. She met a bunch of the players. It was really an incredible experience. So if you haven't been to the U.S. Open, please put that on your bucket list. It's such an experience.
Wow. I'd love to go to the U.S. Open. Yeah. Like,
I'll send you a photo. I'll send you guys a photo. It's a really cool picture we took.
Well, there's nothing cooler than being exposed to the best of the best. I mean, the closest thing I ever had to that was I was a ball boy for the Austin Toros. Back when, so that used to be the feeder team to the San Antonio Spurs back in the day. Now it's the Austin Spurs, and it's no longer the, what did they call it? The D League back in the day? Now it's like the Gatorade League or like the G League or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
I didn't know ball was for basketball. I thought that was just for like tennis.
No, it was like for pre-games, like warm-ups. You would help that. You would just pass them the ball, pick up towels. But it was so cool, like, seeing these elite athletes up close. So that's a really cool experience. Yeah. Steven, do you want to go next or do you want to keep it going?
Yeah, I'll go next. I'll keep it personal. I love Tex-Mex food. That is by far my number one favorite food. That shouldn't be a shocker, being Tex-Mex myself, Mexican-American, and born and raised in Texas. And we're going to, my daughter has a soccer game in San Antonio. So my oldest daughter, Astrid, she switched her soccer clubs last year. And because she was in a new club and all the parents pay tens of thousands of dollars, you can't just come in, to a new club and go to like the best teams. And so she was literally in the entry level kind of select team. And I won't go through all the levels, but there's like 12 various levels to get to the top. And so any big soccer club they have national teams. And if you want to play college soccer, you've got to play for these national teams to get recruited. So my daughter this year has gone from the lowest, like literally the 12th level league, all the way to the 4th level league, which is the bottom of the national team. So she was called up to her club's national team. And so now they play games like out of city. Like almost every game is in another city in Texas or like out of state. And so this weekend we're going to San Antonio, and that means I'm going to get some, like, the motherland of Tex-Mex food for me is San Antonio. And so what's that?
What's your go-to spot?
The go-to, so there are a couple of spots, but we go to Mi Tierra, which is like there's La Margarita and Mi Tierra, and they're the kind
I like Rosario's.
Oh, I've never been to Rosario's.
It's good. Yeah.
We always go to Mi Tierra for the nostalgia. So that's my good news. I'm going to see some great girls soccer, and I'm going to grub on some delicious Tex-Mex. Yeah.
Yeah, that just made me hungry for some reason, but yeah.
My
Daniel?
good news is, what do I got? Oh, my older brother Nick is coming into town today. He lives in Dallas. He has two kids, William and Navy. William, I think, is like 4, and Navy is like 2.5, almost 3. And neither of them, well, I guess all 3 of them haven't met Lena. And so my older brother is bringing William into town today. They're going to go to the Texas football game tomorrow. And this will be the first time that they're getting to meet little Lena. So I'm really excited for that. We're going to go get some Tex-Mex tonight. And yeah, it's going to be a good weekend catching up with the bro.
Love it.
And so, Yemi, it's, as we said, I think it's been like 2, 3, maybe 4 years since we've had you on the show. Don't really know. It feels like it's been 10, but you have a new job. I'm sure there are a ton of other life updates. Give us the quick update. What's new since we last had you on the show?
Yeah. And before I even go into that, can I just take a moment to say, can we just round of applause for you guys? Like the way you've grown this podcast. Come on, please. Can I get a round of applause?
Okay, we'll do it.
I've been so fortunate and lucky to have been one of your earlier guests. And ever since then, I've been watching you all grow, not just your audience, your reach, your community, your content, what you're talking about. I've learned so much from you guys over the last few years. And so thank you for the work that you guys do. Daniel, I reached out to you after a while, like, hey, dude, can I still come on the show? Is it possible? Can I do this? Like you guys are so big now. But so a lot has changed. I think when we last spoke, I had just joined Groupon. And so what happened there was I got the chance to lead Groupon as their global head of DEI. And I got a chance to spend a year in London, in our London office, to help build our EMEA and APAC region. And that was a turning point for me in my DI journey. And then I suppose we'll talk a little bit more about why later on. But one question kept popping up in my brain, especially when I got there. And that question was around, does inclusion raise the bar on results? Does inclusion in DEI raise the bar on results? And so Axon was the perfect next chapter for me, right? It's a mission-driven company, engineering heavy, allergic to fluff, right? And so my objective here at Axon is pretty simple, is to make JEDI, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, a performance system. And so how we attract world-class talent around the world, how we enable our managers to lead across differences, how we grow careers so that we can build tech that protects life. And so that's where we're at today.
Wow, I love it. And I can't wait I want to hear more about that turning point. But before we get there, I purely because we do research and, we obviously know you and, I saw when you made the move. So I immediately looked up Axon to see what the business is. But for, the audience members that have never heard of Axon, give us the quick elevator pitch on what you do. Or how would you describe Axon to a stranger?
Yeah, no, there are typically 2 ways. For me, I didn't know what Axon was prior to a headhunter reaching out to me as well. So, but the 2 ways I typically approach Axon. One, I share this number. It's 1,209. That's 1209. And why does that matter? That's the number of gun-related deaths between law enforcement officers and the U.S. public in 2023, right? The number of deaths, fatality that happened between police officers and the U.S. communities. And Axon's moonshot is to cut that in half within 10 years. And we're about 2 years into that commitment. And every product, every policy, every partnership we drive is aimed at bending that number. And so if I want to be more specific, Axon is a tech company in the public safety sector. We make technologies to help keep communities safe, and whether that's our taser energy devices you see on police officers on their hip, the yellow gun-looking thing. And I often explain it like, think of a pause button that stops a bad situation without using lethal force like a gun. So we also create body-worn cameras, drone technology, software, AI. And so if you've ever seen a body cam clip in the news, there's a good chance it went through our Axon system. And if you look in the top right corner, you might see a little delta, which is our logo, and it says Axon and some numbers.
That's crazy. So I feel like it's the technology that's holding law enforcement accountable. Like if you had to put it very simply, plus giving them tools to de-escalate without.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, we have strong values, and some of the things we talk about is to protect life, to accelerate justice. And again, and we also provide a sense of transparency. And so these are the key themes that we do. And we both support both law enforcement officers, again, because they also need some sense of protection and transparency as well.
Yeah.
as well as our communities, right? So it's one of those things where I think I would look at this as non-bipartisan when it comes to the technology tool itself.
Okay, so today we're talking about DEI. This is something that we were talking about on the show. It felt like every week for 2 or 3 years. I think we then got to a point where both Steven and I got frustrated with like the stagnation of the conversation. It didn't feel
Yeah,
like we were going anywhere. Add on top of that everything that's going on in the world, and it just felt like a hard topic to talk about.
In some
And
cases,
also in some cases
yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
illegal. Yeah. And so let's start there. Me and Steven, we tried to break this down maybe like 5 or 6 months ago on an episode, and we talked about how in some cases it's illegal. But when we had our prep call, I think you did a really good job of like breaking it down, step by step, like what's happened and
yeah.
how that's affected, academia, federal agencies, publicly traded companies. And so let's start there. Give us the full breakdown. One of my favorite conversations that we've ever had on the podcast was with Melanie Naranjo. She put something so simply: HR isn't about optimizing for compliance, it's about optimizing for people, for culture, trust, and workplaces where folks actually want to stay. That's why I'm such a fan of what Melanie and her team at Ethena are building. A couple years ago, she summed it up perfectly on the show. Think about all the required stuff in life that isn't fun: applying for a driver's license, filling out financial aid forms. Now, imagine if those processes were easy, even enjoyable, and you actually learned something from them. That's what Athena does for compliance training. They take on the tough topics like harassment prevention, workplace violence prevention, code of conduct, and make them actually engaging. Unlike the boring, outdated trainings that frustrate employees and executives alike, Athena delivers content that's modern and impactful. We're talking 200 plus courses in 100 plus languages with a 93% learner positivity rating to back it up. And for HR, it's just as easy. Training runs on autopilot with automated enrollment and reminders. There's even a built in hotline and case management system to help create a true speak up culture. Done right, like with Athena, compliance is more than a box to check. It's a way to reinforce your values and build a stronger workplace. Go check them out at goathena.com/MPL. That's goethena.com/MPL.
Okay, I'll do my best. There's a lot to unpack, as you know, and so feel free to poke holes into this and ask me some follow-up questions on it. But so let's start in 2020 for the sake of this conversation. After the unfortunate murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others, and may their soul rest in peace, there was this huge civil and social unrest that pushed inequities to the forefront. There was attacks on the Asian community, the LGBTQIA communities, and the many other communities, and that added a sense of urgency. And the result was we saw many companies, stand up and said, "Hey, listen, we are going to do something about this." And they began to invest in increasing representation across corporate spaces, addressing barriers, investing in long ignored communities. And so DEI was effectively just recharged. However, Stephen and Daniel, when this happened, I think what happened was DEI was typically, at the time, led in corporate spaces and academic institutions. After 2020, I think the social justice lens came into the picture, and the corporate spaces opened door to conversations that were, by nature, politically charged. Okay. And so through that process, a lot of the folks who were leading DEI, obviously great individuals with great intent, passionate about this work. And somehow, and I'm speaking to the DEI practitioners at the time, somehow DEI became more about increasing representation and removing barriers. And that morphed into quota-like goals tied to identity. And so that's a very important piece here, is the quota-like goals tied to identity. And what I mean by that is, goals such as saying, we're going to increase leadership, women in leadership by X% in terms of hires, or we're going to have more people of color or minorities in this position by 6% over the next, 2-3 years, or we're going to invest more funds into, Black or brown entrepreneurs. And all these things make absolute sense because, again, when you think about the long ignored communities, these are the communities we're referring to. And then the legal landscape tightened, right? So, specifically after the 2023 college admissions ruling, right, the federal guidance reiterated a long-standing principle, and this was Title VII, right, that still governs employment, right? Neutral job-related inclusion efforts, they're legal. So that's a legal piece of DEI there. However, employment decisions based on race, sex, gender, and so on and so forth, it's not, right? So now, from that ruling, and this ruling was really inspired by in the academic fact, several states, and again, Stephen, state of yours, right, Texas, began banning DI offices immediately. This was in 2023, public universities. And I think one of the big ones was University of Texas, Austin. They closed down their DEI units. They laid off staff. I mean, this was big news. And so you fast forward to today, as you remember, in January, February, we had, a new administration come into office, and there have been a energy focus on DEI across both federal agencies and academic institutions. And so what we've seen is, withholding of funds to certain academic institutions due to DEI posture and what they consider illegal DEI. You've seen a revamping of leadership at the EEOC, and this is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And many employers began to unwind their quota-based practices and refocusing on more of performance-driven or compliant DEI or legal DEI, and it's still investing in communities, however, somehow without the identity-based preferences. So in essence, the mission for greater equity and better outcomes remains, but the methods must now be legally sound and somehow tied to business performance or business results, if that makes some sense.
So it almost feels like the diversity that is traditionally associated with EEOC, compliance with government regulations, the Equal Opportunity Act, these kind of legacy programs that are tied to changing the numbers as it relates to the, I guess, biggest focus of change. Is that a good way of?
I think, yes, largely so.
Okay.
I think another way to look at it, if I was to give it an example or an analogy, so to speak, is when it comes to making decisions on hiring, it is clear in Title VII that decision cannot be based on your skin color, your gender, your race.
Okay.
When it comes to hiring decisions, Title VII speaks directly to that.
To hiring decisions. Got it.
Hiring decisions. So this is a point where you look at a number of people and say, I've interviewed all of you and you guys have similar academic, and work experience. And the reason I'm picking you is because I want to hit a certain goal because you're a lady or because you're a person of color or because of A, B, and C. That is illegal, right?
Got it.
What is legal is I cannot say as a company, say, hey, listen, I only want to hire, like, for example, you went to a school that's, predominantly, Black or, woman. And I said, well, I don't want to hire you because you went to that school. I don't want to hire you because you are this, right? So illegal is a company cannot refuse employment because of your certain race, color, ethnicity. And so the argument now becomes, if we have historical situation here in America where you've had a certain community not had the ability to vote, not had the ability to get education, and civil rights have helped us kind of get away from that for the most part. And we're here today where we see predominantly the majority in certain office spaces, the majority in certain leadership spaces, the majority in certain of the top institutions and academic institutions. How do you then begin to bring in some of the folks who you consider minorities? And so that's the battle. And so I think what we must do, Stephen and Daniel, is, and this is one of the things that we do at Axon, is that we don't have quotas. I personally have always believed in this, right, ever since I got into it, that hiring must remain merit focused. Hiring must remain based on the manager of that position being convinced that you have the skill sets to be successful in that role, and all about your quality and nothing else. In spite of the fact that we do have opportunities to increase in a certain representation. But I think what's also very important along that same line is if you look at the hiring funnel, there are a number of stages in that funnel. It doesn't just start with hiring, right? That's the very, very last stage. The very, very first stage is the applicant pool. And so this is the top of the funnel. Applicant pool is typically a wide pool. Let's say 1,000 people apply to a certain job. After the very next stage, though, is where recruiters would read through those folks that applied and screen them for the role that they applied for. The very next stage is that there's some of those folks who would then be presented to a hiring manager for an interview. And the next stage is where you get an offer and you join the company. And so what we do at Axon is that we agree that when it comes to our hiring managers, they should be focused on competency for the job, period. However, we also believe that pool in which that we're filtering from, that pool needs to be extremely diverse. We have to make sure we get people that are the best talent from every community, under every single rock, across the entire world. And the reason why that's so important to us, not just because it's the right thing to do, and Dan, you talked about this moral case for diversity, compliance case for diversity. For us, we look at our customers and our products. And our customers, probably the most diverse customers in the world. You talk about public safety, law enforcement, fire marshal, you go on and you name them. Our customers use our products in communities, and communities are extremely diverse. And so we have to make sure that as we create products to serve our community, those products they reflect the diversity of the folks who are making it and the folks who are using it and the folks who are exposed to the products. And so for us, it's not a matter of like nice to have. Like we feel like it's important for us to do this. If not, our mission to provide more of a less lethal option is in jeopardy. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
that's why we take it so seriously that, listen, how do we make sure that our top of funnel is extremely diverse?
Right.
However, we don't give any bias to our managers to hire. And then we monitor what's happening, right? So we don't just increase this and then sit back and say the job is done. No, we are monitoring across the way to say, listen, if we have 50-50, a male to female ratio in applying for a certain job, let's monitor our pass-through rates, which is a population movement from one state to the other. If there's a drop-off, for example, 50-50 women applied for 100 jobs, if all of a sudden that drops to like 80-20, we have questions. Okay, let's dig in and see what happened. Was it biases? Do we need to do more training? Do we need to have people understand more? So we do have things in place to kind of guard us through the role, but I do firmly believe that having quotas truly breeds tokenism, right? We start to hear this thing across the news where, oh, that's a DEI hire. Like, we got to get rid of that. Like, it's so toxic. And I think that comes from this idea or perception that people feel that folks are being hired due to goals of achieving a certain number of representation rather than simply based on their merit.
So, and you've been on the show before, so we go off track. I hope that's okay. So I'm hearing a lot of things in this kind of initial question and answer that you gave. I'm hearing that the legal changes, and I guess the perception around those changes and what it means is really nuanced. Like, you were very careful, I notice, in the words you chose to describe what has changed. And on one hand, that seems like, oh, that's not actually as big of a change as I thought. But on the other hand, if you just look at, like, we zoom out and we just look at like the political dynamics in that, like 50%, like this is a polarized topic, and 50% of people feel one way about it, and 50% feel a very polar different way about it. And that is, one in every two people has a drastically different view and perception of like what has changed. But the reality is these are really nuanced changes. And so that's kind of one thing that I've heard. Another thing that I'm hearing is around quotas. And what a fucking shitty, sorry for the double combo, bad words here, but what a freaking shitty practice. Like, I agree with you. A lot of people don't know that I was a diversity officer from 2009 to 2011.
I didn't even know that, Stephen. Really?
Yeah. For a Goldman Sachs subsidiary called Archon Group. And Archon, if you're old enough to remember the financial meltdown, that all in 2007, that was all I guess, a large contributor to the financial meltdown were these risky loans, these mortgage loans. And so Archon was, in the business, in the ancillary businesses of these like really, I guess they would have been considered at the time innovative loans. And so a lot of the people that, are getting accepted, that need these loans were diverse people. And so there was a belief that, like, okay, Archon was behind the times in terms of like the parent co, Goldman. So that was like part of the dynamic there. But also we have these products that, guess what? When you look at the when you look at the D, the diversity dimensions, there was a lot of diversity in the consumers of these products. And so, but real estate finance is a good old boy, is not what I would consider an industry that is thought to be kind of leading edge when it comes to, these matters, even like HR in general, right? And so it was a tough job. And, I went into that job knowing that it was not going to be easy. I wasn't in New York anymore. I was in Dallas, Texas, and real estate finance, and just a totally different world. And, for me, it was really, really important that we set the tone up front and we're super clear about what we were not embarking on. And what we were not embarking on were quotas. Like that is not even part of this discussion. This isn't affirmative action. We're not instituting quotas. What we are instituting is a different way of thinking, a way of thinking that if we are, at scale, able to embrace this different way of thinking, it will unlock revenue potential. It will lock, raving customers. It will unlock innovation. And so I'm with you. And it's not just diversity. It is just like any quota or like strictly numbers-based system. I ran an engagement survey company for 9 years, almost a decade. And guess what? The companies that solely focused on ENPS and were hell-bent on we've got to increase ENPS from a positive 10 to a positive 30. Like, I can't tell you how many CEOs were like mandated these changes. Guess what? Managers were like meeting with their teams, trying to identify who the detractor was, trying to understand exactly why they rated. And so that's what happens when you solely focus on numbers or quotas. You end up with these unintended negative consequences and these behaviors that are not culture building behaviors. And in fact, they're the opposite. And so I'm also hearing that. And lastly, I'm hearing that, like, because of the changes, because of the legal need to move away from quotas, which y'all weren't even doing anyway, there's this need to kind of reorient our minds around like what we were doing. And that's the part that I want to get to next. And so you mentioned moral and compliance, and the way that I've always kind of looked at this is, there's the moral lens, like this is just the right thing to do. We should encourage a culture of inclusion. We should be equitable in our practices, and we should embrace diverse ways of thinking, diversity in all its definitions. There's the compliance case, like, okay, we got to submit, we're a government contractor, so we've got to submit our EEOC reporting. We've got to do these things. So we have to meet these stipulations. And then there's the performance case. And that is like, we're going to crush our numbers if we are able to embrace this way of thinking. You look at your consumers, you apply the diversity lens across your consumers, and you start to tell a different story about what the business potential is. And so are those still kind of the three pillars? Like, I think at this point, if you're looking at moral, things are gonna fall apart really, really quickly, because like I said earlier, 1 in every 2, the workplace today is very different the workplace in 30 years ago, 50 years ago, when these laws were put into place. It was very different to 2009, right, when I was implementing diversity at the real estate finance company. And so, like, what are the pillars today? What are the emerging pillars that companies should be looking at?
We've had a lot of chief people officers come onto the show, and if there's one thing that they have in common, it's that they run their org their way. I think of people like Crystal Boyson at Sprout Social, who completely rethought performance reviews for her company, ditched long-form questions, created 3 clear ratings, which they then can auto-calculate into a final rating. I think of Carmel Galvin from Klaviyo, who ditched the generic way of measuring quality of hire and built a custom framework tailored to each team. I think of Jessica Zvan, who tracks LTV to ECAC to evaluate every single manager. Like, these are the exact kinds of people leaders who wish they had a tool like ChartHop. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ChartHop, ChartHop is a flexible people ops platform and HRIS that brings in all of your people and business data into one place. So think, HRIS plus having the ability to bring in data from places like Salesforce. And they let you customize key processes like headcount planning, compensation, performance, and engagement exactly the way that you want it. No rigid templates, no one size fits all playbook, just the flexibility to build the systems that you truly believe in. With ChartHop, you can really run your org your way. If their platform sounds like something that you want to learn more about, I highly recommend that you go request a demo. Just go to charthop.com and make sure to let them know that we sent you.
Yeah, no, great question. And before you said so many good things, Stephen. Gosh, that was good. Something that stuck out to me, and again, before I respond to your question, was you talked about setting the tone. Was one thing you said that I want to come back on. The other thing you talked about was this idea of change. And the truth is, from a law perspective, nothing has changed.
That's what I'm hearing.
The law hasn't changed. It's still Title VII. And Title VII is a federal law that bans employers. I think any employer that has over 15 or so employees from discriminating against hiring, firing, pay, promotions, or terms of work based on race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, and so on and so forth. That's the Title VII law. Now, what has changed is the enforcement. This is where setting the tone comes in, the setting the tone. And so this new administration has set the tone that we're going to enforce this in a way that we probably haven't seen enforced in a very, very long time. We're going to hold people accountable in a way. I mean, hold people accountable meaning that if you are doing any resemblance of what we perceive this to be, we're going to stop your federal funding to your university for research. If you do any, and so that's the sense of accountability and tone setting that's being set at the very, very top of the office in the United States.
And the bigger the institution, the bigger the risk, right? Like the more money you have, the bigger the risk you are at being sued or being, losing this. And I think Harvard is a great example. It's like billions of dollars, right? We're talking about?
Absolutely. And so that's what we're seeing happen. And I think what's helping that happen is this deep misconception, this misunderstanding about what DEI is about. And I understand how the misconception was birthed because for the most part, when we celebrate wins from DEI over the last 5 years specifically, not even going 10, 20, success has been defined by representation increase. So specific underrepresented community. That's what fills the headlines. That's not what the work has been. The practitioners have been doing a lot more work beyond that, beyond race and ethnicity, where there's neurodiversity, where there's
That's why there's so many acronyms now, right? That's why there's so many letters, because we added, as we evolved our thinking, we added the letters.
Agreed. And so for me, since that's been top of mind for a lot of people, when that's challenged, it's like, oh, DI is this. Like, no, DI is beyond representation. It's beyond that, right? And we can go into those details. So I wanted to kind of, because when you said those things, it really hit my mind. I think setting the tone is the biggest change that has happened in DEI over the last 5 years. There is a new energy and a new group of individuals who are setting a different tone around this. And it does feel like an attack. It does feel like it's bringing down the entire work that we've done. It does feel like it's unraveling all the work that we've done for the folks that are in it. And Stephen, you know this, and Danny, you know this too. For the folks that are in it, it's a small piece. And this is a legal component that's been argued from day one around how do you set quotas and how do you do that in a legal way. So fast forward to today. To your question around, do those three things still drive DEI in terms of like compliance, the moral case, the business case? I think everything has shifted, and there is a parallel now that cuts across all three of them, a parallel. And so I'll call it guardrails, and that's a compliance piece. You must be legally sound. That's just a fact. Like, you can still have the moral case for it to feel like it's the right thing to do. That's fine, as long as it's legally sound. You can still have believe in the business case for it to say that our customers demand it, our stakeholders want it. We know that diversity of thought and perspective is driving innovation. Great, as long as it's legal. You can still, so the key word here is that it must remain legally sound, meaning that there are no quotas. You're not excluding anyone. For example, the EEOC put out a guidance that defined what legal DEI looks like versus illegal DEI. First time ever. That was exciting, right? And so whether you agree with the content or not agree with the content, we're finally getting a sense of, Mike, I think, Stephen, I think you're on mute. We're finally getting a sense of what's good and what's wrong.
And I was just going to say, like, that seems like a good thing. Like the clarification of legal and illegal, like that feels like that should have just been with us for a while now. That I was just interjecting that point, but carry on, keep going.
No, I think that wraps up my thought. It's the matter of like, yes, Stephen, all these things still exist in some capacity, but they all look different because the tone has been set different at the top.
So I want to go back to something you said earlier. You said we can no longer hire based off of quotas, and instead it's about expanding the talent pool to make sure that there's as much diversity as possible. And so I'm curious at Axon, what does this look like? Are the tactics maybe a little bit different than they were before? Is it looking in new places? Is it being a remote first company to where you just have a bigger pool that you can hire? How do you think about this?
A number of ways. I explained one of them earlier, right? So our focus is really that we really believe and we want to test our systems. And when I mean systems, we want to test our hiring processes. And so we do that because we look at the funnel of hiring. It's the applicant pool, the recruiter screening, the manager interview, the offer, and then acceptance. That's the funnel, right? And as you know, a funnel it's tighter at the bottom and wider at the top. And so for us, we think that our focus should be on top of we look to scale the top of the funnel while being so intentional about keeping the quality of candidates. So it's not an idea of just saying, let's scale and just cast a wide net because we want to cast a wide net and get diverse people at the top of the funnel. It's like, how do we ensure that the quality and scale are growing at the same yield? So that's one, and that's a very, very difficult thing that we were trying to do. And we do that by being intentional and by monitoring things like, event to application yield. So when we go to an event like GraceHop or we go to like Afrotech and we have a bunch of applications that come in, what is the yield in that? How many folks who came in applied? Of those who applied, how many of those folks did we actually make it through career assessment? And then we assess those. And then we kind of define that as some type of quality, a good quality. We also look at when we have year-over-year lift in applicant quality. So what happened in 2024 versus what happened in 2025? How do we compare that? We do something called pass-through rates, and I talked about this earlier. And that's just the population movement from one of those stages to the next one, right? And so how is that moving? Are we seeing a big drop off from one stage to the other? 100 women applied to a certain job in R&D, but when we got to the interview stage, it went down to 5. 95% dropped. What happened? Like, how do we investigate? How do we understand what happened behind the scenes, right? So we're asking more questions than we are trying to define and say, we want 90% to make it through the end. Does that make sense?
And so that makes sense. So part of it is looking in places where maybe there's a higher density of different groups of people. You're not saying I'm only going to go to these groups to try to find candidates, but you're going to try to show up in as many different spaces as possible to attract a diverse population. And then based off of the pass-through rates, you can then at the end of the year look and say like, oh, like this one event that we went to had an extremely high pass-through rate. Not only did we bring in diverse talent, which is great, but it was the highest quality of talent.
You nailed it. That's exactly what we did, right? So it cuts across like top universities, you name it, whether it's like Georgia Tech University, Harvard, Stanford, whether it's HBCUs like the ones in AUCC, whether it's at Afrotech, which is a huge tech conference that happens every year around the fourth quarter in Houston now, whether it's GraceHop that's happening in Chicago this year in December, whether it's ASE, which is, Woody, like Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, whether it's tapping into their job boards, make sure our job posting is on there, whether it's SACC, which is a veterans community where we get a chance to go to their events in DC, and so again, and then obviously, if you're on LinkedIn, we have our job website, right? So again, we're pulling sources, and this is just speaking to the US, globally similarly as well. We are seeking the best talent under every rock in the world. And that's our focus, right? And we refuse to refrain from that approach. I mean, again, because we do feel like for us to achieve the really ambitious moonshot goal that we have, we do need the best talent from across the world.
I love that. And it's almost like hearing you talk, I'm thinking about how Daniel and I look at our business metrics, how we look at the campaigns we send, how we look at the quality of our audience. We look at, click-through rates. We examine a funnel to see, okay, we thought we were going to have better results, but like, where did we get stuck? And that just seems like good business to me. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. But before we move on to the next segment, I've got to ask a hard truth question.
Please.
And I remember feeling this like right after, in the aftermath of, the George Floyd tragedy and the response that we were seeing at scale, having done diversity work since, let's call it 2005, it just felt incongruent with kind of the trajectory in which we had seen the focus and progression of DEI work over the course of years and decades. It felt weird. It felt like there was this huge surge, and knowing what I knew, and I'm just curious, to get your look back, your kind of retro perspective, and based on what you also knew and know today, do we bear some responsibility for this? The DEI practitioners, it felt like a land grab. Like, who's going to sell the diversity consulting thing first? And like, here's the playbook, and, start with your missions and your mission, vision, values, and like embed diversity. I just wonder, like, did our good intentions drift us a little too far from, what we really should have been focused on? And, for me, that's really business impact.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Again, Stephen, you answered the question while you asked the question. Yes. And I've been on record many times saying this. And I do think us as DI practitioners do have some responsibility here. We do. And I can also say that in good faith that it wasn't intentional. Look, this isn't one of those blame games, right? Where it's like, it's your fault, right? We drifted into establishing the wrong KPIs for why this was important. And I think that's where we got this wrong. Yeah, I recall, and this is Yemi, I recall when I first started doing this work. And I was one of those people, Stephen, I'm not sure about you, I was a tech guy. I was in tech my 12 years of my career. Then I went into like business development, product development for the remaining career. And then from that, I took the DI job when I was at OCC. And so I learned about the work on the job. And so for me, it was all about those, celebrating diversity events. That was the top things for me, like Black History Month, Women's History Month. It was about events and how many people showed up and what the feedback rating was for each of those events, instead of outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. It was about how do we get more hires that look like, people of color or women in leadership. That was my success. I set those criteria, right? And I put that out there to the entire company and say, this is what success looks like. And that's where I went wrong, right? Because again, the message can be confusing. Mm. If I'm telling you that success in DEI is about making sure there is more of X or Y or Z in leadership, then I'm telling you that X, Y, and Z is more important than anything else when it comes to assessing top talent. And that is not true. What I should be saying is that, hey, listen, if we want to be a company that builds products with an inclusive mindset, we need to bring in people who have diversity of thought and perspective. And the way it works is that diversity of thought and perspective is tied to human experiences. And those human experiences is tied to, fortunately or unfortunately, based on how we look, where we were raised, our socioeconomic backgrounds, those things shape who we are and how we think. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, where I remember as a very young kid, at 6 years old, I was in a boarding school by myself without my parents, with other kids. And I had to develop at that young age skills to survive at 6. Whereas my daughter's 11 years old and she can't even walk around the block without me make sure I'm 10 feet away from her. Right? So she probably won't develop those skills as quickly as I do. But my point is that these experiences of us growing up and how we grew up in different ways, whether good, bad, or indifferent, shows up in how we lead and how we do our work. And so we shouldn't make success the representation. Success should be the input we have. Like, imagine bringing a bunch of diverse folks into an office. However, they're not included. People don't know how to work with them. They're being told they're being too loud, or they're too emotional, or they're too aggressive, or they're not aggressive enough, or they're not emotional enough, or whatever it might be. And so for me, success is about how these individuals who are coming in, every single person is able to perform at their optimal performance. That's what it's about. It's not so much about how we got here. And not to say that's not important to know. And so, one of the things I also think is very important is not only are we looking to bring in diverse talent at the company, but how are we creating an environment where people are aware of their biases and they understand to say, listen, as a human being, I don't care if as long as you have a brain, you have bias. It's a great thing. You should have bias. It's the way your brain takes shortcuts to make decisions. We need you to be quick in your feet. Like, we are a fast-paced company. So yes, have your bias and love your bias. But please understand that your bias can have a positive or negative impact if unchecked. So you need to be very, very keenly aware that when you're making a decision, it's objective based. And sometimes I make decisions that are bias based and has a negative impact on the person, whether it's around recruiting, it's around performance reviews, it's around promotions. Check, check, check. Not get rid of your bias. That's impossible. I don't want you to do that. That's like getting rid of your brain. No. But make sure that those decisions you're making are grounded. So we talk about bias quite often at the office, especially around moments like performance review, which we're going to go through now. Like, we go around and talk about bias. Like, hey, listen, are you checking your bias? Okay, here's how you check them. Here's the check bias checkers, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? And we have to monitor and communicate trends we're seeing in the company as well. So to your point earlier, Stephen, engagement surveys, right? We have an engagement survey, and we also have an inclusion survey that goes a little deeper into how you feel and your perspective around the company. Like, these are the information that drive our strategy today. I seek information from our colleagues to drive the tactics and tools we're doing to drive inclusion at the company. Because at the end of the day, it's about performance. I need to know what you feel is holding you back from being your best. And if there's a trend across the company for that, that's so important for me to address. Rather than this idea, like I used to do, where it was like, oh, what's the right thing to do? What's the moral case to do? And not being intentional about your culture, your company, your goals, your customers, performance. And so I think for me, as a DEI practitioner, that's been the biggest evolution that I've gone on, to make sure that I am focused on the right things and not necessarily just the moral case of diversity.
This whole conversation is throwing me back to 2020. I had just started a job at Udacity, and immediately, like overnight, they decided we needed to have ERGs, and being one of the few Latinos at the company, got invited to the Latinx ERG. We then would have like a weekly meeting. On that weekly meeting, we would kind of just like focus. Like, there wasn't really a mission. It felt like we were just kind of like meeting to meet, and we were doing things like sending out a weekly newsletter, on like the history of like the different like cultures within the Latin community, and it was great. It was great. We were celebrating our culture, but when I think back to that moment, I feel like our time could have been better spent on how do we attract more customers from the Latino population in the U.S. How do we make sure that the content we're creating is also working for people of color, for Hispanics? How do we advertise this business? Are we in the right spots? Do we have, like maybe we want to have a strategy where we're going after all of Latin America, and we have, an ad strategy for that. Like, there could have been so many other ways that the ERGs could have been used in addition to the work we were doing, because it felt like we just had another job,
Yep.
and it was unclear like what that job was. And so when I think about the future, that you're painting this performance driven DEI, and you gave a bunch of good examples of what that looks like,
Yeah.
everywhere in the company. And that also throws me back to a GoDaddy episode we had where Christy Lilas walked us through how they did like an audit of every single process within the company, and had like a heat map, and they just like went one by one. But not only was it, you know, uh, better for DEI, but it was just better, like just better process in general. And so I guess what's going through your mind as you hear me share this story? Like, what does the future of like performance driven DEI look like?
No, I love that. And before jump into that, I just want to talk about the ERG piece, because that's such a really important piece. And so some of the things we've done aligned with what you've shared is, first of all, when I joined the company, it was called affinity groups. And again, Stephen talked about that. Like,
I remember affinity
just the
groups.
word could be misleading, right? It's about affinity. Like, no, these are employee resource groups. The intent is to provide resources to help increase performance. So that was the first thing we did, was just a quick name change. And to your point around talent attraction, how do our ERGs support talent attraction, right? So not only do our ERG community sometimes attend some of our recruiting events that might be in some diverse communities, right? So that's one way of doing it, is to have them go to these events and share their experiences with communities that represent them. But we have something called a discovery program that I love, right? And so the discovery program is a program that anyone going through our interview process after a certain stage, right, could choose to ask to speak with someone in the company, just to say, hey, listen, I'm still in the interview process. I'm still making my mind. I would love to speak with someone. And so our ERG community represents our entire, it's diverse enough, it represents our entire organization. So you could pick someone from the ERG community, like, hey, I want to speak to someone that's, part of the women's ERG or a veterans ERG or Hispanic, like you name it. And I think that's a way that, we get to lean on our culture to help attract talent. And so we have other ways that we're trying to engage in, even with our customers, right? Going to customer events and being there and talking about their experience and hopefully inspiring customers who want to work with us more, like, what a great culture and X, Y, and Z, or maybe even want to join our company after they leave their service or what have you. It's like, those are some of the ways that that came to mind as you were talking about how we could evolve ERGs from simply being, and I want to be very careful with the word simply, but from being just events driven and being performance driven, right? One of the things we have in our ERGs is we have co-chairs and executive sponsors, right? We make sure that every executive sponsor, and these are like VPs and senior VPs of the company who are sponsoring the ERGs, we're making sure that they have a mentor-mentee relationship with the co-chairs that are leading the ERGs. So doing performance review, guess what's happened? The executive sponsors write a note to the manager of the ERG co-chair, the leader of the co-chair, to talk about their leadership capabilities throughout the ERG, right? So now a manager has your functional position and also your, right? And so those are the inputs that I think really helps bring home this idea that, and again, we also provide stipends at the end of the year to our ERG colleagues, co-chairs. So every co-chair gets a stipend for leading the ERG. We know that's something that's extra that you're doing. How do we share as a company that we appreciate that effort, right? And so based on that, we also provide some sort of stipend. But again, I think the ERG piece is a really, really important piece. Okay, now with that being said, Daniel, please tell me your question again, because I think I lost that as I was going through my my thinking there.
No. I think that's great. I think I was just trying to make the connection between like shifting from the moral case to the performance case. And I was curious like what other examples you had, but I mean, you've already shared so many, and you shared another one with the ERGs.
Yep.
So
Over to you, Steven. Sorry, we have an internal doc.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if there was going to be an add-on. So digging into performance, because in my head, and I might be looking at it wrong. Earlier, I mentioned how I was just thinking about how Daniel, like something you said about how you were looking at your efforts at Axon in terms of better aligning DEI or JEDI with business outcomes and the way that you were looking at pass-through rates. I think that's what it was that got kind of my head clicking. One of the things that is really big in marketing is performance marketing. Like, we want to really take a numbers and analytical approach to our marketing programs. And we want to do that because we want to invest more in the marketing tactics and swings that are actually driving results. And that is, I feel like that is easier said than done in marketing. And so, I'm curious, what that looks like in the DEI function, and or share with us a little more about like other ways that you're kind of taking this performance driven approach within the DEI programs, and yeah, let's dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it starts with, I think there's not a one size fit all, first and foremost, right? And I do want to make sure that I emphasize that the why still matters, right? So by no means is this shifting away from like this idea of the moral case is no longer important. It's always important. I just think that the proof is in the outcomes, Okay. And so one of the things we do look at, we also monitor promotions at the company and performance ratings. And so I do have a monitor that allows me to see literally, and it cuts it through the lens of diversity sometimes, where I could see like if we have performance ratings such as top 25 versus achieves versus development needed, and how does that look through the lens of diversity, gender, ethnicity, X, Y, and Z. And then in my perspective is that as we look at those, are there inequities? Are there things happening within a certain team where you're seeing a group of community folks, um, a lot lower than the other, right? Men and women. Have we seen more women being top 25s than not? That's a big lever for me to look at. And then at the same time, as we empower trainings and we do, L&D things and we do our ERGs and we do X, Y, and Z, is that increasing or decreasing? Are we seeing a higher engagement with our, Black and Brown colleagues? Are we seeing a higher engagement with our Asian colleagues? Are we seeing more engagement with X, Y, and Z colleagues? So I think the monitoring system that we have allows us to kind of get insights to some of those levers and how those things are changing based on what we're doing in terms of our programming. So what are our programming? We do a number of things across the board, right? So whether it's training, and what we've done now is in the past, we've had training specific for certain communities, right? Whether it's a women leadership development program or program targeted to like Latinos and Hispanics, because we bring someone that's a speaker and that can tie competency with culture, right? What we've done with the current climate is we've expanded that and say, listen, it's open for all. Like we're not limiting you. You don't have to be Hispanic Latinos to come to this program, or you have to be a woman to come to this program. Even though we are going to curate in the content some things that are tied closer to this culture, if that makes some sense. So we have shifted this idea of making it only about a certain community. And I think that's important for us to do because I think the diversity of thought and perspective is essentially what DEI is about, right? And if we get too narrow, and so this is back to your point, Stephen, if we get too narrowed into the idea of like, hey, we want to lift the bootstrap of a certain community, we lose the voice of other communities. And so I think some of the things we're trying to do is trying to intertwine communities to bring them together as one. And another example is, for example, is our ERGs, where we have a budget. Well, each ERG has a budget to kind of celebrate and do things throughout the year within that community. Well, guess what? Going to 2026, our idea now is to say, listen, how can we encourage more cross collaboration, intersection across communities? And so now we're saying, okay, well, 60% of your budget, you can do whatever you want in that regard. But 40% of them can only be used when you're doing in partnership with another ERG group, for example. Like that's the tone we're looking to set across the board. And as we do these different things, we are consistently monitoring promotions, performance reviews, and looking to see if there's anything that's happening that is impacting that. And then we have interventions. Like I said, if there's something that jumps out at us that is quite shocking, we obviously will pull up and work with our HRBPs and speak with those that we need to speak with to kind of investigate what's going on. Similar with pay, we have pay equity reports that we do, and we have an independent party that comes through to make sure that there's a sense of pay equity across the board, and we communicate as necessary, right? So there are tons of things that we do on a certain basis. Similar with we have a manufacturing team, and so we work closely with that group to ensure that there's a sense of equity within that group as well. And as sometimes they work different hours than we do, we might work holidays, they might not work holidays, right? So how do we continue to make sure that we have a one culture across not just our U.S. office, but we have offices in London, we have offices, in Vietnam and China, right? So how do we ensure that whatever we're doing is local based? One of the big things I learned in my experience at Groupon was I wanted to take everything we're doing in the U.S. to EMEA and APAC. I learned really fast that wouldn't work, and so now it's like, okay, how do we start local first, right? And so these are some of the things that we are doing at the company to ensure that our inclusion survey is a input to defining our strategy, and yeah. Whether it's mentorship programs, whether it's scholarship programs to bring in new talent, and I can go on.
I mean, well, do you have? I know we're over time, so maybe we just, if you have time for one last question.
Sure.
Everything you're describing is people ops as a product, which is something that we're huge proponents of. We're partnered with Jessica Zvon, who has the book Built for People. We have something that's called MPL Build. And so as you were describing your process for making DEI more performance driven, I was like, oh, this is just like people ops as a product. On the hiring side, you're looking at things like pass-through rate. In marketing, that's conversion rate. Like we can look at all of our different sources and see where the good quality leads are coming from. Same thing. When it comes to like retaining your customers, like retaining your employees, you can get really granular in the data. You can look at your engagement surveys, and you can see how different experiments that are being rolled out company wide are affecting different populations. And then if there are smaller things that you want to test locally, you can run these small beta tests, see how it goes, and then start to roll them out to other local populations. And so it was really more of an observation rather than a question. But
Yeah.
yeah, anytime we have a chance to plug MPL Build, I'm going to use it.
I love it.
And so, on that note, I feel like we should move to rapid fire questions.
Sure.
I think the questions, I mean, they're definitely different than the first time you came onto the show. It's still 4 questions, slightly different. Question one: what's one piece of advice that you'd give to somebody starting in HR today?
Yeah, you stole it, Daniel. I would say that piece of advice would be to treat DEI, treat people operations like a product. Use the agile methodology, start with small experiments, measure real outcomes, kill what doesn't work, double down on what works, and scale. And again, I think and the closer you can connect that to performance, the more successful you'll be.
I was gonna add, yeah, like and connect it to the business performance, and you got there. So moving on. If your team gave you a superpower nickname, Yemi, what would it be?
It's interesting. Daniel sent me some of these questions earlier, and I actually dropped it in the Slack on the team. And so they come up with a lot of
Yes.
different things. So let me just read to you one. And I don't know what this is. I think ChatGPT has a lot to do with this, but here goes nothing. Unity Prime or
Unity
Equinox,
Prime.
or Equinox Prime. It says you are the ultimate unifier of people and purpose, and you help inspire teams of all backgrounds around a common goal.
I love that.
I
I
feel
I,
like
love
I,
that's
that.
spot on.
yeah, I guess it's great. I think I hope it's true.
I
I
mean,
hope
I
it's
feel like one of your gifts is like the second that you walk in a room, everybody feels comfortable. Everybody feels elevated. You were hyping me and Steven up in the pre-call, or like the seconds before we went live, when we went live. I think, yeah, it's definitely your superpower.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Next
Stephen,
question.
Stephen, what do you have for me? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, next question.
If you could steal one strategy from another company, what would it be?
Yeah. Oh, this is a good one. So Toyota has this what they call and done cord, where anyone in their manufacturing line production can stop production at any moment when they see a defect. And I would love that to be something that we can do at the company. When if there is anything that speaks against our values or our culture, um, if we could just pull a cord, bing,
Mm.
and this alarm goes off, and everyone's like, "All right, what's the issue? Let's go fix it together." That would be incredible.
I love that. I feel like we get all these crazy AI ones, answers to this question, and I love that it's like a manufacturing line type of strategy.
Yeah,
The last question, it's how you got on the show, Yemi, all those years ago. We believe that there are people leaders out there truly
yeah,
innovating and pushing this space forward. If we were
yeah.
to cast a light or spotlight, an emerging leader, like who would that be? Who should we have on the show next?
And in this, I am so biased, so I must acknowledge and tell you that I am biased with this person and this name. But her name is Elizabeth Hart. She actually works at Axon here as well, and she's our executive VP. Well, she leads our people operations. She's my boss, and I think what you would appreciate the most about E is not just her experience; it's her style of work.
Mm.
She is, people often say I'm data driven. I love data. I get into weeds. It's a different kind of weed when it comes to weeds. When it comes to E, like she is extremely analytical. When you talk about people operations being a product, it is a product for her. and she sees it no other way, and she's extremely biased that way. And so she's such an inspiring speaker, leader, highly respected. And so I thought of a number of names, but I was like, God, like if E came, and when E comes on the show, and let me be a little bit more provocative. When she comes on the show, I think you both will be really, really impressed by not just her experience and her background, but really how she looks through the people operations and how she's been able to empower it to be respected as an organization and business unit like any other in a company. Like that, I think that is one of the things I most appreciate about the work she's done for the group, is that at Axon, at least at the very minimum, I think that people look at the organization just as they would look at any other department in the organization.
Well, we have to have, I'm calling her E already, but yeah, we have to have E on.
You got to have E on.
Yeah.
And be ready. Be ready. She's, I mean, yeah, she's a special one. She really is.
All right. Last tradition of the show, one word or phrase close. We all respond with a word or phrase to just like put a stamp on it.
Ooh.
And if you need time to think, we can go.
Yeah. Let me think for a second. There's this Dante Inferno quote that I really love, and I'm going to butcher it because I don't have it on top of mind, but it goes something like, there's a special place in hell for those who choose to remain silent in the face of moral calamity. So there's a special place in hell for those who choose to remain silent in the face of moral calamity. And that's something that I often think about and often inspires me to always speak up in moments that I think I see something that's wrong.
As you were saying that, no, I was going to say, Steven was typing out, damn, Yemi bringing the fire today. And and so that's going to be my one word close, fire. Like this was an amazing episode.
It really was. And I'm going to go with hopeful because I've been waiting, literally waiting for someone to have the courage and to have the commitment to this conversation to come on our show now when no one's wanting to talk about this topic and have the conversation with us and explain to us like what is really going on. What is really going on? Literally no one has reached out. You were the first person, Yemi. So I just want to say, thank you for the work you do. Thank you for your purpose and the mission, and values and vision that you have as a human being and the impact that you want to have on this world. Because, a lot of people wanted to come on this show years ago when this was a hot topic, like that we couldn't satisfy the number of people that wanted to come on, and they're not here today talking to us. You are. And so I just want to, give you a shout out. You shouted us out at the beginning. I want to close with a shout out to you because, it does take courage in times of difficulty or, when everyone is rocking, to be the one that's rolling, that's hard to go against the grain. And so thank you. I think it says a lot about Axon as well in your commitment to your customers and the vision and purpose y'all have. So this is just amazing. And it's good. I feel like you are family. It's a weird feeling to have all these people that you've interacted and shared space with, that you haven't spoken to in so long. And so thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you both so much. This was cool.
All right. And let's not wait 3 years for the next
I know.
one.
Yeah.
Let's make it an annual thing. I'll come back anytime.
I'm down.
We would love that. All right, y'all. Have a good weekend.
Bye, guys.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.